Hi, AP Scholars. It is Monday, November 16th. This is Mrs. McGeehan just checking in with you to let you know what you're up to for today. By now, you know that we have shifted to a Tier 2 short-term Tier 2 learning situation in which our learning will be online until December 1st. Many of your teachers will be conducting required Zooms. For this week, since I'm still in quarantine with my whole family, including 3 small children, I'm going to forego required Zoom sessions this week and post work here each day instead. So you're going to want to check back each day for new work. For today, we are going to, for this week, you can see from my note here, we will be laying the groundwork for our study of Frederick Douglass's narrative. This is our second text or longer text of the year after Fahrenheit 451. And as you can see as you jump over to the unit overview, this unit will focus on rhetorical analysis. So looking at the rhetorical situation in which Frederick Douglass is writing, and then considering that rhetorical situation to think about how Douglass makes strategic writing choices based on that rhetorical situation. You can also see in the explanation about this unit that this text will also introduce us to our first 2 systems in our thematic study. So we're going to focus on the system of language, as we talked about last week. If you were a B student, we talked about some of the systems we're going to be exploring when we met last week during our Zoom sessions. And 2 of those systems are the system of language and the system of education. So last week you were introduced to the concept of systems as a whole. And in our study of this text, we'll be looking at our 2 first systems that we'll be studying. So that is the system of language and the system of education. You can tell that our primary focus, you can tell from our unit essential questions that our primary focus is going to be on language, but our secondary focus will be kind of just considering education as it is handled within this text as well. Our unit essential questions that we'll be looking at throughout this text are: why is language powerful? And what is the significance of names and naming? To go along with that then today, you're going to be starting off today by looking at some terminology. And the first question, as I just mentioned, is why is language powerful? And what is the significance of names and naming? Well, in the scheme of AP Language and Composition, when we're talking about AP terminology, language and the significance of names and naming is actually not all that significant. In other words, when you are writing rhetorical analysis essay for the exam, it's not incredibly important to be able to put a name to the language that, or the maneuvers that the writers are using. But it can be helpful to understand what the terminology is, and also knowing that terminology draws your attention to some of the moves or maneuvers that writers and speakers are doing within their writing. So I have 2 handouts that I'm going to ask you to explore today. The first is this Diddles handout, and you're going to want to download these and save them to your files. This Diddles handout, as you'll see, breaks down some patterns that we can start to look for in rhetorical analysis. So this is an acronym for diction, imagery, detail, language, and syntax. So I want you to spend some time today with this document and with the other document that I have linked here as well, this AP Language and Composition Terms handout. This AP Language and Composition Terms handout is fairly lengthy, and I want you to download this and save it to your files so that you can continue to come back to this. I happen to like this particular handout. You can find handouts like this all over the internet for AP Language and Composition Terms, but I happen to like this one first because it parallels the Diddles handout that I have also given you. I would like you to take a look at both explanations though for this Diddles acronym, the explanation here on this handout and then the explanation that also is included on that handout that focuses on that approach, and see kind of how they compare and contrast. So the first section of this handout focuses on diddles, diction, imagery, details, language, syntax. And then this one also adds tone to this as well. I'm going to actually download this and open it so that you all can see it in its document in just a moment. You're going to need that. The other reason I like this handout is because it's broken down into sections. So there is just a super long list of terms and terminology, but you'll start to see that it's broken down into sections and categories for terms. So this is a category for figures of speech. As you scroll down, you'll see terms for rhetorical strategies. As you continue, you'll see terms for analyzing syntax. So these are all terms that explain and define different sentence structures that you're going to want to become familiar with. And as you continue down further, you'll see that there is a section for logical fallacies, for argumentation. And then I especially like this handout because it also deals with sound elements. So the last section is dealing with things like assonance and consonance and sibilance. So all of these ways that we can talk about the sound that words make. So what I want you to do with this handout, as well as the other handout today, is essentially highlight it for 3 different layers or levels of understanding. You're going to provide 3 different, I'm going to open mine up here in my PDF. When you save it, you should save it. It should save as a PDF. And I'm going to ask you to identify or make 3 different categories of understanding with these terms that you'll use as we go forward. So the first category is you're just going to read down through these handouts and determine which words you already know. In other words, you recognize the term, you could provide a definition for the term, you could identify examples of the term, and in fact, you could probably create your own examples of the term as well, or of the strategy as well. So you're going to select one color for that category, terms that you are very familiar with, that you know kind of flat out, that you wouldn't need to study in order to know. The second category is terms that are vaguely familiar to you. So things that you might recognize the term, you could maybe give like a vague definition for it, but maybe not a precise definition, and you may or may not be able to identify examples of that term if you found them in writing. And then the final category is words that are wholly unfamiliar to you. So you don't even recognize the term, you definitely could not provide a definition for it, and you definitely could not identify examples of it in writing. You're going to select 3 colors. You can either do this, you can print these out and highlight them using actual highlighters, or you can use the highlight function in your PDF document and then save your highlights as well. At some point, you just want to make note or mental note of your color coding so that you know which is which. In order to use your highlight feature in your PDF, you're going to go up here to this highlight button and select it, and then you can highlight anything in the text that you want to highlight. So as you go down through, you're going to want to color code as I just talked about, using the system I just talked about. I would also encourage you to read these explanations and highlight anything that is familiar to you already, or maybe not so familiar to you, things that you want to keep in mind as well as you take a look at these words. In order to change your color, your highlight color, you need to right-click on your highlighted portion and come down here to Properties, And when that opens up, you can change your color as well as you go through. So you're going to want to, as I mentioned, make a color coding key and then identify as you go along those 3 layers or levels of understanding of these terms. Ones that are very familiar to you, you understand them, you can provide a definition for them, you could make your own examples within your own writing for those. Then your next layer is terms that are slightly unfamiliar to you. In other words, you've recognized the term, you've seen it before, but you may or may not be able to provide a definition for it. You may or may not be able to find an example of it in writing. And then finally, words that are totally familiar to you. You can provide a definition, you can use it in your own writing and provide examples in your own writing. So these 3 different colors is how you're going to label these 2 documents. Once you've done that, you'll go ahead and save those highlighted or color-coded documents to your own files. And I'm going to have you come back here to your folder for this week. And I'll have you complete the 3-2-1 summarizer for today and then submit that. The 3-2-1 summarizer is simply 3 terms that are wholly unfamiliar to you, 2 terms that you vaguely are familiar with, and 1 term that you're completely familiar with. Once you have finished that, then you are going to submit it to this summarizer, 3-2-1 summarizer for AP Terms submission slot. All right, folks, if you have any questions as you're working on today's work, let me know. We'll be, of course, using these terms and looking for these terms as we continue then to read Frederick Douglass's narrative. Again, knowing the terminology for these terms is not essential on the rhetorical analysis section of your AP exam, although being familiar with these terms and the concepts of these terms, that they even exist and are things to be looking for in writing, is certainly helpful as we continue our rhetorical analyses throughout this year and as you approach the rhetorical analysis essay on the AP exam. I hope you all have a great Monday. Be in touch if you need anything. Take care.